When my wife and I first moved into Harbor View Estates, I remember feeling like we had finally achieved a slice of the classic American dream. The neat rows of similar yet distinct houses, the neatly trimmed lawns, the calm, tree-lined streets. Everything exuded a comforting sort of uniformity. It was a brand new chapter in our lives. Our new home came with an expansive backyard and a generous front lawn, perfect for weekend barbecues or for our dog, Pepper, to roam. We had heard, of course, that there was a homeowners association in this development. But in all honesty, we didn't think much about it. As first-time homeowners, we figured that an HOA was just there to ensure property values remained stable and help coordinate community events. The monthly dues seemed reasonable, and I found it somewhat reassuring to know that communal areas, like the neighborhood lake overlook and playground, would be well maintained. Those first few weeks were blissful. We spent our Saturdays unpacking boxes, getting to know the neighbors, and tinkering with the landscaping. People mostly kept to themselves, but waved cordially if they saw you on the sidewalk. It felt like the ideal suburban retreat from the hustle of our old apartment in the city. Little did we suspect that hidden in this picturesque community was a figure who policed the neighborhood with an iron fist, Helena Arnett, but known privately by nearly everyone else as Karen. She was a middle-aged woman, somewhere in her late 40s or early 50s, who carried herself with a quiet authority that felt more like intimidation. She was on the HOA board, and I'd soon learned that her capacity for micromanaging and meddling knew no bounds. At first, we only glimpsed Karen from afar, a poised woman with meticulously styled hair, dressed sharply even on casual weekends, strolling the sidewalks with a notepad in one hand. She seemed fixated on every slight detail of each property, her gaze drifting from house numbers to mailbox flags to the length of grass in the lawns. A couple of neighbors made passing remarks, hinting that she could be difficult or strict. But with so many tasks on my plate, I didn't think we'd ever find ourselves in her crosshairs. As it turned out, I was wrong. Very wrong. My unsuspecting little electric lawn mower, which I'd purchased for its supposed quiet and eco-friendly operation, would be the catalyst for a storm of conflict that shook our peaceful existence. And from that day on, Karen's watchful eyes would fix on me almost every weekend, spoiling the sense of sanctuary I'd hoped to find in Harbor View Estates. The very first time I laid eyes on Karen up close, I was in the middle of mowing my front yard one Saturday morning. I chose an electric mower specifically because I disliked the fuss of gasoline engines and believed the machine's lower noise level would minimize complaints. It produced a gentle hum, nothing too grating or loud, at least by my standards. While I was making a pass near the sidewalk, I noticed Karen standing at the corner, a phone in hand, looking my way with narrowed eyes. She was wearing pale slacks and a crisp blouse, the image of suburban authority, with that infamous notepad tucked beneath one arm. She marched over as soon as I hit the power switch to empty the bag of clippings. Without a proper greeting, she spoke in a clipped tone. "Excuse me, are you aware we have noise regulations here in Harbor View Estates?" I blinked, caught off guard. Hi," I responded, somewhat awkwardly. "I'm aware of the general rules about loud parties at night, yes. But I believe mowing in the daytime is within permissible hours, correct?" Karen pursed her lips. "We do have official guidelines regarding noise levels. Some residents might find even this sort of constant humming extremely disruptive. I've had complaints from neighbors about intrusive sounds during midday. Are you certain you're using an HOA-approved device?" Her words had that unmistakable condescending lilt, as though she was an authority figure scolding a child for misbehavior. Part of me almost laughed. An electric mower was typically quieter than a traditional gas-powered one. If anything, it should be less annoying. But I chose not to argue outright. "Well," I said calmly, "I checked the official HOA rulebook, and it only mentions time windows for noise restrictions, primarily after 10 p.m. or before 7 a.m. This is a Saturday morning, so I'm well within acceptable hours." She sniffed, unimpressed. "We'll see. If I get more complaints, I might have to escalate the matter with the board. Please keep that in mind." I nodded. "Thank you for letting me know. I'll ensure I don't mow too early or too late." Karen gave a curt nod, then walked off as though she'd just given me a final warning. I resumed my mowing, baffled that she'd found cause for complaint about an electric lawn mower at midday. Still, I chalked it up to a one-off annoyance. If I abided by the posted quiet hours, there should be no further trouble. or so I assumed. A week later, an official-looking HOA envelope appeared in my mailbox. Inside was a typed letter, stamped with the Harbor View Estates logo, containing vague language about a documented noise disturbance from my property. My name was listed as the homeowner in question. The letter warned that repeated violations could lead to fines or HOA disciplinary measures. I felt a surge of indignation reading it. The letter lacked any real detail. No date or time was specified, just a claim that a complaint had been lodged about excessive noise from lawn maintenance equipment. I knew exactly who was behind it. None of the other neighbors had seemed bothered. In fact, a couple had even commented that my electric mower was comparatively quiet. That evening, I attended a casual block party a few houses down. Sipping a soda, I casually asked around if anyone had heard of new noise regulations or if my mowing had irritated them. Most folks shrugged, saying they didn't even notice. A neighbor named Jill, who lived 2 doors down, shook her head in disgust. "That's definitely Karen at work," Jill remarked. "She tries to micromanage everything around here. It's probably the next drama she's stirring up now that she's done complaining about parking issues." I told Jill about the letter. She rolled her eyes, explaining that Karen prided herself on maintaining community standards and would twist minor concerns into official violations. "She's unstoppable once she fixates on something," Jill warned. "I'd keep an eye on your mailbox. She might ramp it up if she thinks you're not cooperating with her vision of quiet perfection." That night, my wife and I pored over the HOA's official rules again, confirming that the only specific mention of noise restrictions was the after 10 p.m. rule. The entire premise of this complaint felt baseless. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd drawn Karen's ire, and she wouldn't let go easily. She had an official platform, after all, as a board member, giving her the ability to file spurious claims and conjure up trouble. Little did she know that I wasn't one to be intimidated. If she wanted a fight over noise that wasn't even outside the rules, I'd be prepared to stand my ground. Over the next few weeks, I continued to mow my lawn each Saturday morning or early afternoon, always within the standard daytime hours. Yet Karen escalated her disapproval through a mix of indirect hints and new claims. I'd catch her strolling by on foot, wearing earplugs and gesturing in exaggerated frustration whenever she looked my way. Other times, I'd see her scowling from her front window, which, unluckily, had a line of sight to my property. Then came a moment that truly tested my patience. One hot Saturday, I paused from mowing to grab some water, only to find Karen marching right up my driveway. She had her phone out and was apparently filming me or the mower as evidence. She leveled a finger at me. "Do you realize I was attempting to rest this afternoon, but your incessant humming woke me?" she snapped. I stared at her, incredulous. "It's 2 p.m., I said, struggling to keep my voice polite. "I'm sorry if you were trying to nap, but I'm well within normal hours for yard work." Karen clutched her notepad. "My schedule should be respected too," she insisted. "Some of us use the midday for rest or quiet enjoyment. Our guidelines do mention reasonable quiet at all times. Continuous droning is hardly quiet." I recalled the rule she was twisting. The HOA's general guidelines included a line about maintaining a peaceful environment, but it was typically invoked for extremely loud parties or nuisance behaviors. A basic electric lawn mower hardly qualified. Determined not to buckle, I reminded her that the official noise restriction window was night hours, not midday. She huffed, muttering that she'd speak with the board and see if I could be penalized anyway. As she retreated, phone still rolling, I felt a strange blend of anger and amusement. This woman was truly obsessed. Some neighbors jokingly called her the decibel dictator. If Karen wanted me to keep everything silent so she could nap at 2 p.m. on a Saturday, that was her problem, not mine. But soon, I'd discover that Karen had allies on the board, or at least a knack for twisting policy to her advantage. Her next moves would drag me into a more formal showdown with the HOA. A few days later, an official email went out to the entire neighborhood. Harbor View Estates' monthly HOA meeting, scheduled for the following Wednesday evening at the community clubhouse. Usually, these meetings covered typical topics: budget updates, landscaping improvements, any new proposals for the community center. But the email specifically listed an agenda item titled Noise Complaint Discussion, Mowing Equipment. That raised my eyebrow. Karen had clearly forced the issue into official territory. I decided to attend the meeting in person, determined to present my side and show how ridiculous this entire crusade was. On the designated evening, I arrived to find about 24 residents gathered. The atmosphere was casual but tense. Board members sat behind a rectangular table at the front. Karen was among them, wearing a stiff navy blazer and flipping through a stack of papers. She shot me a tight, knowing smile as I took a seat near the front. The board president, a middle-aged man named Mr. Halverson, opened with typical announcements about new flower beds for the entrance, a proposed speed bump near the playground, and so on. Then he reached the dreaded noise complaint discussion. As soon as he introduced it, Karen leaned forward, adopting an air of professional concern. She proceeded to read a short statement about the importance of maintaining peaceful afternoons in Harbor View Estates, pointing out that some residents rely on midday rest or have health conditions requiring quiet. She never mentioned my name outright, but alluded heavily to repeated mowing disturbances. She even cited a line from the HOA guidelines about respecting neighbors at all times, conveniently ignoring the explicit time-based noise regulations that actually spelled out after-hours guidelines. When she finished, Mr. Halverson cleared his throat. "We also have the homeowner in question here to speak, if he wishes," he said, gesturing to me. I stood up, my heart pounding slightly as a handful of neighbors turned to watch. I calmly explained that I used an electric lawn mower, specifically chosen for its relatively low decibel output. I emphasized that I only mow between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. on weekends, well within any normal standards. I quoted the actual HOA rule about nighttime noise restrictions, noting that midday usage was perfectly legal. Then I politely expressed my confusion about Karen's complaints, pointing out that no other neighbor had objected. A few heads nodded in agreement behind me. Karen listened, arms folded, and once I finished, she jumped back in with a flurry of rhetorical questions. Should we not expand our definition of noise pollution to protect those with irregular sleep schedules? Is it fair for one homeowner's weekend routine to disrupt the entire block? The board members shifted in their seats, seemingly unsure how to mediate. Ultimately, Mr. Halverson suggested they table the matter for further investigation. He asked me if I could consider adjusting my mowing time or if Karen might find compromise. I responded that I'd be happy to mow a bit later than 10 a.m. if that helped, though I wanted an official resolution, not indefinite conflict. Karen scowled. The meeting ended with no definitive verdict, but a promise the board would review existing guidelines. I left that night feeling both validated and uneasy. I'd stood my ground, but Karen wasn't backing off. In fact, the public debate seemed to energize her. In the weeks that followed, a rumor spread that Karen was working on a proposal to revise the HOA's official noise regulations, presumably to clamp down on midday mower usage. Harriet, a friendly neighbor who occasionally served on smaller HOA committees, told me that Karen had privately circulated a draft among certain board members. According to Harriet, the draft suggested new rules that limited unnecessary yard equipment usage during a midday window from noon to 3 p.m., effectively codifying a nap time hush. Harriet explained that it wasn't an official proposal yet, but if Karen managed to rally enough support, it could appear on the agenda for a board vote. This was a step beyond a petty complaint. Now, Karen wanted to alter the entire community's rules to satisfy her personal preference for quiet afternoons. If that passed, it wouldn't just affect me, but many residents who found midday the most convenient time for lawn care. Harriet rolled her eyes at the idea, but admitted that Karen had a knack for swaying certain board members who wanted to keep the peace or avoid confrontation. Feeling a need to protect my rights and that of other neighbors, I decided to push back more decisively. I wrote a letter to the HOA board, politely warning that such a change would be arbitrary, likely unpopular, and might even conflict with local city ordinances that allowed yard work at reasonable hours. I also started quietly polling neighbors, many of whom expressed frustration at the notion of a mandatory midday ban. Some had shift work or used weekends to catch up on chores. Others simply didn't want yet another restriction. Karen, meanwhile, seemed to sense I was mobilizing opposition. She escalated her side by dropping snide remarks on the neighborhood online forum, complaining about selfish individuals who disregard community harmony. She never named me, but her references to electric hums and early afternoon racket made it obvious. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. I half expected a flurry of new violation letters, but ironically, the original rulebook's language still shielded me. She couldn't find me unless the rule changed. So we were locked in a waiting game. Would the board adopt Karen's new midday restriction? Or would sanity prevail? Fortunately, not everyone on the HOA board was under Karen's sway. One afternoon, I received a discreet phone call from a board member named Carla Green, someone I'd never actually spoken to before. She introduced herself as the HOA treasurer. Carla got straight to the point. Look, I'm not supposed to be partial, but I've reviewed your situation, and it's clear Karen is overreaching. The board is getting conflicting stories. On one hand, Karen insists you're constantly causing noise trouble. On the other, many neighbors, and even the existing rules, say you're fine. I just wanted you to know not everyone is behind Karen's push. She went on to explain that Karen had indeed proposed new midday restrictions, but faced resistance from at least half the board members who saw it as unnecessary meddling. She's trying to spin it as an accessibility or health measure for elderly residents who need naps, Carla said. But it's obviously personal. She's singled you out specifically in internal discussions. Carla advised me to keep documenting my mowing times and the decibel level if possible. If you can show actual data, it might help us disprove her claims more systematically, she suggested. We want a fair solution. We also don't want to spend all our time on petty feuds. I thanked Carla profusely. It was reassuring to hear from a board member who recognized the nonsense. Taking her advice, I bought a simple decibel meter online. The next few weekends, I logged my mower's noise output from the street and from my property line, capturing readings around 60 to 65 decibels, comparable to normal conversation or background music. Hardly the ear-splitting racket Karen painted it to be. Armed with this data, I felt more confident about thwarting her push for midday regulations. Meanwhile, Harriet and other neighbors rallied behind me. They rolled their eyes at the notion that an electric mower was such an affront. The stage was set for a second confrontation at the board, where Karen's revised rules would either be adopted or shot down. Even as the board deliberated, Karen refused to relent. She continued her campaign of intimidation. Twice, she snapped photos of me in the act of mowing, presumably to catalog offenses. Another time, she stuck a sticky note on my door with an underlined passage from the HOA guidelines about respecting neighbors' comfort, as if that alone would prove me a criminal. On top of that, she started telling folks that I was a habitual rule breaker, painting me as a rogue neighbor who refused to compromise. But ironically, Karen's combative approach began to backfire. Because we lived in a relatively tight-knit area, word spread that her vendetta lacked substance. People had seen me mowing, always at normal hours, the humming hardly noticeable beyond my immediate yard. Some even joked that they made more noise with leaf blowers or power washers than my little green mower ever did. When Harriet or Carla got wind of Karen's negative talk, they made a point to correct the record, reminding others that no real rule had been broken. In a funny twist, Karen's obsession actually rallied more folks behind me, as they realized that if she could come after me for something so minor, she might target them next for any perceived transgression. In response, Karen doubled down. She posted a short community notice on the official HOA website, reciting the same moralistic line about maintaining a serene environment. She hinted at an upcoming decision by the board that would improve life for those seeking midday rest. The subtext was obvious. She wanted everyone to see that the new midday ban was coming. All the while, the date for the next HOA meeting, the one where the new guidelines might be voted on, loomed. I kept up my mowing routine, never shifting from the late morning or early afternoon time frame, and kept collecting decibel readings. The drama was exhausting, but I refused to let Karen's intimidation disrupt my life. In the midst of this tension, a mischievous idea took root in my mind. If Karen insisted that my electric mower was too noisy, maybe I could underscore her absurdity by replacing it with a genuinely louder machine, but still well within the legal decibel range for daytime. Initially, the thought was half a joke, something I jokingly proposed to my wife. But the more I considered it, the more tempting it became. Not only would a new mower poke holes in Karen's argument by revealing she had no actual noise regulation on her side, it might also highlight how an electric mower was comparatively quiet. If she truly thought my current machine was loud, what would she say about a more powerful model? I took some time to research. Gas-powered mowers often run around 85 to 95 decibels, clearly louder than my current 60 to 65 decibel range. That might come off as too combative, but certain heavy-duty electric models could produce a hum closer to 70 decibels, still nowhere near breaking typical city noise ordinances, yet noticeably stronger than my old machine. My wife laughed when I told her I was seriously considering it. "Are you sure you want to provoke her more?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "Could that backfire if the board thinks you're being spiteful?" I shrugged. "Possibly, but I'm not breaking any rule. If I buy a model that's still under typical daytime noise limits, there's nothing the HOA can do, unless they adopt that midday ban. And even then, it wouldn't help Karen if I mow outside those hours. She'll see how pointless her crusade is. Plus, the irony is too delicious to pass up. After some deliberation, we decided to go for it. I found a well-reviewed, more powerful electric mower, bigger cutting deck, slightly louder motor, but still well below any official noise threshold for normal daytime operation. I placed the order and felt a mix of glee and nervousness. If Karen thought my old machine was too noisy, wait until she heard the new one. The new mower arrived on a Thursday afternoon in a bulky cardboard box. Friday evening, I assembled it in my garage, feeling an odd sense of anticipation for Saturday morning. In a neighborhood typically so placid, I'd never expected yard equipment to become the symbol of rebellion, but here we were. Come Saturday, around 10:30 a.m., I rolled the shiny new mower onto the lawn. Pepper, our dog, watched with curiosity from the porch. I felt the weight of Karen's gaze, though I hadn't spotted her yet. Flicking the power switch, I heard the distinctive whir, deeper and more pronounced than my older model. It was still not ear-splitting by any means, but definitely more noticeable. My heart pounded as I started my first pass across the grass. Part of me worried that I was about to unleash chaos, but the stronger part reveled in the notion that I was still safely within the HOA's official guidelines. If Karen dared approach, I had my decibel meter and the rulebook at the ready. It took about 15 minutes for Karen to make her appearance. I saw her front door open abruptly. She emerged wearing her typical immaculate weekend attire, pressed slacks, a pastel blouse, storming down her driveway with an expression of contained fury. I pretended not to notice, calmly continuing my mowing. The hum of the motor provided an ironic soundtrack to her approach. Sure enough, she marched up close, stopping just beyond the property boundary, phone in hand, presumably filming again. Her voice rang out, loud enough to be heard over the mower's hum. "This is unacceptable. You've increased the noise level? This is twice as disruptive as before." She was practically trembling with indignation. I paused, switched off the mower, and turned to face her. "Good morning, Ms. Arnett," I said politely. I replaced my older mower with a more powerful model. Still an electric, but yes, it's a bit louder. Of course, it's well within legal limits for daytime use. You can't just do that," she sputtered. "I warned you about the excessive noise. Now you've made it worse. I'm going to file another complaint, and this time, the board will take action." I shrugged mildly. "Feel free. As you know, the HOA's rule only addresses noise after 10 p.m. or before 7 a.m., and it's nowhere near that time. There's also no decibel limit in the official text. I'm not violating anything." Her face reddened. "We'll see about that. The board is considering new regulations. Once they pass, I'll have grounds to fine you if you keep this up." Without another word, she spun on her heel and stomped away, phone camera still pointed at me. I exhaled, heart pounding. Yes, I'd provoked her, but I felt strangely liberated. If she wanted to push me into a corner, I'd push back with facts and legalities. The next board meeting would be decisive, one way or another. That weekend, the confrontation escalated yet again. On Sunday afternoon, I decided to mow once more, partly because the grass needed it, partly because I wanted to demonstrate that I had no fear of Karen's intimidation. As I was halfway through the yard, I noticed her creeping around the side of our property line, phone raised, possibly trying to record me from a different angle. At one point, Pepper barked at her, trotting up to the fence that separated our yards. She yelped, startled, then glared at the dog as though it, too, were conspiring against her. I resisted an urge to roll my eyes. Karen tapped furiously on her phone screen, presumably sending messages or snapping photos. But nothing about my mowing changed. I followed the same pattern, never crossing onto her property or making any attempt to antagonize her beyond the normal operation of the mower. Then she did something I found deeply disturbing. She hopped into her car, drove around the block, and parked in front of my house, engine idling. With her windows down, she aimed her phone out the window, capturing the noise or video. Some neighbors walking by cast her confused looks. It was an odd, almost stalker-like act, but she was presumably trying to gather evidence from the curb. I decided to pay her no mind, finishing the job calmly. When I put the mower away, she finally drove off, tires squealing slightly. The pettiness was shocking. Harriet texted me soon after, saying she'd seen Karen's car, too, and that she was worried about how obsessive Karen was getting. I assured Harriet I was fine, but inside, I felt uneasy. Just how far would Karen go? She seemed determined to prove me a nuisance at any cost. Still, I trusted that the board, or at least enough members like Carla, would see reason. The more Karen tried to gather evidence, the more obvious her vendetta became. And given that we were days away from the next board session, the one rumored to include her proposed midday ban, the tension soared. The evening of the board meeting arrived with a palpable hush over Harbor View Estates. The community center's parking lot was full. Word had spread that Karen's revised noise rules were on the agenda, and neighbors on both sides of the debate wanted to witness the outcome. Inside, the meeting area buzzed with subdued chatter. Karen sat at the board table, her posture rigid and a stack of papers in front of her. Carla caught my eye from across the room, offering a small, encouraging nod. After preliminary announcements, Mr. Halverson introduced the main topic, proposal for revised noise regulations. Karen took the floor, adopting a carefully measured tone. She spoke about the need to protect residents who require midday quiet, citing a handful of anecdotal stories about people being disturbed by yard equipment. She hammered on a claim that the HOA needed more precise decibel limits and a ban on unnecessary yard work, from noon to 3 p.m. on weekends. When she finished, she invited open discussion. Harriet immediately stood up. With respect, Ms. Arnett, you appear to be basing this on personal grievances rather than broad community consensus, Harriet said. We have no documented decibel thresholds, and the city ordinance itself allows yard work at any time during daylight hours. Why are we adding restrictions that go beyond local law? That prompted a small round of supportive applause. Karen frowned. Because local law is insufficient to maintain the serenity of our community, she retorted. We must hold ourselves to higher standards. Another neighbor chimed in. So you want us to avoid mowing, weed whacking, or using any power tools midday? That's prime time for families to do chores. Many folks are at work all week, so the weekend midday might be their only window. Karen pursed her lips. There are other time slots available, early mornings or late afternoons. And frankly, the right to quiet should be prioritized over convenience. If people can mow at 8 a.m. or after 4 p.m., no midday disturbance is necessary. That triggered more murmurs. Finally, Mr. Halverson invited me to speak, recognizing I was directly implicated. With a mix of calm and a flicker of defiance, I pulled out my decibel meter logs and a few short notes. I explained how my original mower was quiet, how even the upgraded mower's noise levels were well below typical gas machines, and how my usage time stayed clear of any posted quiet hours. Then I read out the actual city noise ordinances that permitted yard equipment anytime from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Finishing, I concluded, Karen's personal preference for midday naps doesn't equate to a neighborhood-wide policy. We should not adopt new rules that infringe on everyone's schedule and conflict with established local codes. The room seemed supportive. Carla gave a succinct statement next, confirming that the board had no record of widespread complaints regarding mower noise. In fact, she pointed out that only Karen had filed official objections. Karen, infuriated, tried to say that many neighbors were just afraid to speak up, but Harriet cut in, referencing multiple folks who had no problem with normal daytime mowing. After the arguments were aired, Mr. Halverson called for a board vote on whether to adopt the new midday ban and more stringent decibel limits. Karen looked tense, glancing at each board member as though urging them to side with her. But the tide had turned. When Mr. Halverson asked for all in favor, only Karen and one other board member tentatively raised their hands. Then all opposed. 4 hands rose, including Carla's. The motion failed, 42. A few watchers clapped. Karen's face went blank, her posture deflating slightly. She'd lost, and quite publicly. But the board wasn't done. Mr. Halverson added that they'd reissue a reminder about normal courtesy hours, referencing 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. as the official quiet time. Otherwise, no new restrictions would be imposed. We appreciate residents being mindful, Mr. Halverson said. But there's no justification to alter the existing guidelines for midday. Karen tried to protest that this left vulnerable neighbors unprotected, but the board gently shut her down. Harriet piped up, "If anyone has a legitimate noise complaint, they can file specifics. But we won't pass a blanket ban for one person's preference." I exhaled in relief. The fiasco that had consumed so much energy was, for the moment, resolved in my favor. Karen had failed to impose midday quiet hours, and my new, slightly louder electric mower was still perfectly legal. People began gathering their things as the meeting adjourned. I caught Karen's glare across the room. Her eyes burned with resentment. Yet there was little she could do. Outside, a small group of neighbors congratulated me. One teased, "So you're the mower master now, huh?" Freed us from the tyranny of forced naps. We shared a laugh, though I suspected Karen's vendetta might linger in some form. For the immediate future, though, the law and the board's decision were on my side. Over the next few weeks, the neighborhood settled into its usual rhythms. I kept mowing my lawn on Saturday mornings or early afternoons, using my new, more powerful mower without qualms. I continued measuring decibel levels, more out of curiosity than necessity, and confirmed it never exceeded the moderate hum typical for yard tools. Karen, meanwhile, didn't concede gracefully. She sulked whenever she spotted me, turning away with a mutter. She occasionally posted passive-aggressive messages on the HOA's community board, vaguely referencing selfish neighbors who refused to be considerate, but most people brushed it off. The board had spoken. Her attempt to pass new regulations was dead in the water. I heard rumors that Karen was plotting some new angle, maybe claiming my mower caused vibrations that threatened property foundations, or that the extension cord across the sidewalk was a hazard. But none of that gained traction. The reality was that no official policy supported her gripes, and the board members seemed tired of indulging her crusade. She remained an influential figure, but her credibility had taken a hit after the public defeat. Strangely, some neighbors told me they found the entire situation comedic. Jill, from down the street, joked that I should invite Karen to watch a demonstration comparing the old mower to a truly obnoxious gas blower, so she'd realize she'd gotten off easy. Another neighbor teased that I could crank up music while mowing to show Karen what real noise was. I politely declined the latter suggestion, not wanting to ignite further drama. But the sentiment was clear. Many residents had grown weary of Karen's micromanagement. Once or twice, I spotted her pacing near my property line on a Saturday, as though hoping to catch me in some violation. But each time, I only mowed at a normal pace and waved politely if she looked my way. With no new rule to enforce, she was effectively powerless. As summer progressed, I reveled in the relief of normalcy. The weekly chore of mowing the lawn, once overshadowed by anxiety about Karen's disapproval, became a simple routine again. Though the hum of my new mower was indeed more audible, no one else complained. In fact, I once overheard a neighbor telling Karen that if she wanted to hear loud, she should stand by his old gas mower from the 1990s. Realizing how silly the entire saga was, I found a strange sense of pride in having stood my ground. Perhaps Karen's meddling had inadvertently strengthened my connection with other neighbors. People who previously barely said hello now stopped to chat, exchanging exasperated jokes about the great mower fiasco of Harbor View Estates. Harriet told me that in private board discussions, folks were determined not to let Karen's personal vendettas overshadow actual community needs. One bright afternoon, Harriet, Carla, and a few others came by for a casual get-together in our backyard. We grilled hot dogs, lounged in lawn chairs, and admired the well-mowed grass. The conversation drifted to how the HOA had some genuinely good programs, like summer block parties and holiday decorations, overshadowed by Karen's negativity. Carla mentioned upcoming board elections in a few months, and some joke that I should run, though I politely declined, not wanting to wade that deeply into HOA politics. All the while, Pepper frolicked around, and the hum of the suburban afternoon enveloped us. A few yards away, I caught a glimpse of Karen walking her route, notepad nowhere in sight. She paused at the far edge of the sidewalk, glanced at our little gathering with a frown, then continued on. There was no confrontation. She looked isolated, overshadowed by the easy camaraderie we'd forged despite her attempts at stirring conflict. Life settled back into its usual suburban patterns. Each weekend, I'd roll out the louder electric mower, take care of my lawn in that calm, methodical way, and enjoy the sense of normalcy that came with finishing a household chore free from petty interference. Karen never filed another formal complaint, presumably because she knew it would go nowhere. The midday ban she'd championed had been voted down, and the existing rule remained: no noise after 10 p.m., which was never an issue for me. Occasionally, I reflect on how bizarre it was that a mild-mannered homeowner like me got pulled into a high-stakes drama over something as mundane as a lawnmower. But in communities with HOAs, it only takes one overbearing personality to stir trouble. The silver lining, I suppose, is that I learned the importance of standing firm, documenting everything, and leveraging the actual text of the rules. Karen thrived on intimidation and vague references to standards, but she couldn't stand against documented facts and actual votes. These days, Harbor View Estates remains a pleasant, mostly drama-free neighborhood. Karen is still on the board, but her clout has waned. She occasionally hunts for new violations around the development, but far fewer people indulge her complaints. The memory of her fiasco over an electric mower that was never truly loud in the first place taught people that not all of her claims hold water. Every time I power up that upgraded mower, I chuckle quietly. There's a faint sense of mischief in hearing its deeper hum, a reminder that sometimes, when you're pushed, you can push back by doubling down. The important thing is staying within the bounds of the law and the actual HOA guidelines, not letting bullies manipulate or scare you. After all, in the grand scheme, I am just mowing my lawn. And if a certain Karen has to listen to that hum while she attempts her midday nap, well, that's perfectly legal. And there's nothing she can do about it anymore.